Back. The big question remains, will ultimately Obamacare, as critics call it, or the Affordable Health Care Act be upheld and constitutional or not? And we want to bring in Elizabeth Cohen, who is talking a little bit more about this. Elizabeth, okay, so the individual mandate, obviously, is the biggest point of contention here. That would mandate some more than 40 million Americans who are currently uninsured to have health insurance. And one of the provisions is that there would be a penalty if you don't get that health insurance, right?
I like how Ruth Bader Ginsburg called it. She called it the must-buy provision.
Right.
You must buy health insurance. And Alina, that's really pretty unprecedented in this country. We don't tell people you have to buy something.
Right.
So let's break it down. Now, for people like you and me who work for a company that has insurance, we don't really care about this, right? Not an issue. They give us insurance, we're fine. But many, many millions, tens of millions of Americans buy insurance on their own. And so they will have to keep buying it. And then lots of people don't buy it at all. They say, you know, I don't want to buy it. So this says you have to. So I'm going to introduce you to some fictitious friends of mine, my imaginary friends for the day.
Cute people.
Cute people, yes. So let's introduce you to Eddie, the entrepreneur. Eddie works for himself. He doesn't get insurance through his employer. He earns $80,000 a year. Under this rule, they say to him, Eddie, buddy, write us a check for $4,500. And if you don't buy insurance, we are going to charge you a penalty of $2,000. So Eddie has a choice. Eddie can pay the lower amount, the penalty, which would seem like the obvious thing, right? You know, it's less. But he doesn't get anything for it. He just pays the penalty and doesn't get anything.
So for $2,500 more.
Exactly. He could actually get insurance.
Right.
So, you know, one would hope that he would make that decision, because if Eddie doesn't and he gets sick and ends up in an emergency room, you and I have to pay for him.
Right.
And then let me introduce you to Eddie's friend, Maria. He has a friend, Maria, who's a musician. She doesn't do as well as Eddie does.
Okay.
She only makes $25,000.
Oh, she's a struggling musician.
She's a struggling musician, right. You can see she's kind of struggling with that violin there. She would have to pay $1,726 for insurance or pay a penalty of $695. Again, Maria has a similar choice. Now, Maria's insurance, you'll notice, Alina, is a lot cheaper than her friend Eddie's. It's not because she's cuter. It's because she makes so little money that the government has stepped in and subsidized the rest of the cost. Now, a lot of people, I'm sure, are wondering, gee, what would it cost me to get insurance, and would I get help from the government? If you go to cnn.com/empoweredpatient, we have a link to a calculator, and you can put in your income and see the answers.
All right, but then the penalties don't apply to everyone, right? There are exceptions.
Yes, there are exceptions. Some people would not have to pay a penalty. Actually, a pretty hefty percentage wouldn't have to. So I want to introduce you to the Clark family. So this is a family of four. Together, they earn $80,000. They would have to pay $7,600 for insurance. If they choose not to, they don't get any penalty. Zero. And the reason for that is that $7,600 is such a big chunk of their income that the government kind of gives them a pass. The government says, you know what, we understand, we get it. That's a huge amount of money.
Is that a percentage basis?
It's a percentage base, so it's very good. So it's less than 8%. You get an A for this segment. So it's less than 8%. I mean, I'm sorry, it's more than 8%. And so they say it's so much money that we will not charge you a penalty. And so again, it'll be interesting to see what the Clark family does. That's a lot of money for them. But before, it would have cost them even more. Or maybe they couldn't even get insurance. So they may say, great, it's worth it to us. We have kids. We want them to be safe. Or they might say, you know what? Forget it. We don't want insurance. We're healthy. We don't even want to go there.
Thank you for the A. I'm not as dumb as I look. All right. You have a story coming up about a little girl who really is depending on this coverage, right?
That's right, because people forget sometimes that healthcare reform, some of it's already gone into effect. And so there's a little girl named Violet who was about to lose her insurance.
Pre-existing.
Partly because of pre-existing and partly because of lifetime limits. But she was going to lose her insurance, and now she has it. It's stable. It's not going anywhere. But if the Supreme Court reverses healthcare reform, if it overturns it, Violet will lose her insurance.
Oh, boy.
So we spend time with her and her family, and they talk about, this family is glued to this argument. The Supreme Court argument is everything to them. It's their daughter's health.
Well, when you're talking about boiling down this issue, which is so complicated. I mean, 2 years out, we were talking about this earlier, so many people are still so confused by this Health Care Act. And then you look at this family. I mean, this is why we're debating this issue, because it does impact so many Americans and so many little girls and boys out there.
You know, for her, it's not confusing at all. For her, it is, if the Supreme Court overturns healthcare reform, she will lose her insurance and she will not be able to get new insurance. She will be uninsurable, and she is very sick.
Elizabeth Cohen, thank you as always for simplifying it for us.